Hello everyone and welcome to this BSGCT seminar. My name is Ellie and I'm part of the Early Career Researcher committee at BSGCT. We have organised a session for you today so that you can learn all about the day-to-day life of being a PhD and postdoc. And we have 5 panel members who are going to speak to you today about their time as a PhD and postdoc, what they get up to on a daily basis, and anything interesting that they come up with. So I will introduce the panel members as they come up for their turn speaking, and they will be able to chat to you a little bit. If you have any questions specifically for any of the panel members, just put them in the chat and we will get round to them. If your question is general, then feel free to ask it to anybody. But if it's more specific, if you wouldn't mind writing the name of the person that you want to ask the question to, that would be useful for when it comes. And thank you to everyone who submitted their questions in advance. We will get round to these when we open it up for questions. So I'll briefly introduce you now to all of the panel members, and then more specifically when we get to their turn. So we have Anna, Alicia, Juan, Sonam, and Julia today. And first up, we are going to start with Anna. So I'll just stop sharing my screen so you can see everybody's faces again. And Anna. So Anna is a first-year PhD student who works on a gene therapy for a rare neurological disorder. And Anna, do you want to go ahead and start telling us a little bit about what you get up to on a daily basis?
Yes, I will indeed. Thanks, Ellie, for that introduction. So as my PhD is an in vivo study, I generally start every morning in the animal unit. So currently I am trying to phenotype my mouse model and also perform a wild type toxicology study of my new vector, which was done on neonatal mice injected with a new AAV. So in the morning, I will take weights every other day, and then I'll perform behavioral studies at the relative time points. And if any of those mice have either reached an experiment endpoint or look sick, I will sacrifice and collect the relative tissues for further analysis. The rest of the day, an example of the rest of the day, what might look like, I usually perform immunohistochemistry on the brains of the mice that I collected from. So I'll section the brains and stain for the relative antibody, and I'm trying to assess any neuropathology of my new vector. And when I'm not doing that, I'm either making the vector or I am also the lead research rep for the Institute for Women's Health. So that means a lot of meetings to discuss any problems that the students are having at the Institute. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, Anna. So what has it been like starting your own project? So, when you start your PhD, you suddenly have this little project, which is all of your own, and it's quite exciting. So what's it been like for you?
I think initially coming as an MSc or a research assistant, it's quite daunting. I had a lot of direction when I was a research assistant. I was pretty much kind of told what to do for people, whereas now starting a PhD, like, this is all my own work. I find like there's a bit more creativity or freedom. If I want to do something, if I feel like that is cool, I'm going to do that, I can go do it and see what happens. A lot more responsibility.
Yeah, but good though.
I love it.
Yeah. So is there anything you particularly like or not like about being a PhD student so far at the beginning of your journey?
Yeah, I think it probably feels a bit lonely sometimes because it is just me working on the disease. But then on the flip side, I love my group and we have great fun. And whenever I'm stuck, I can always give them a bell. Very, very helpful. So kind of different sides of the same coin.
Yeah, well, it's good to know that everything is going well so far, and you're enjoying it, and you've got a way to go on your project, but it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it.
Yeah, so far so good.
Good. Okay, so we will move on to Ali, who is a little bit further down the PhD line. So Ali is a fourth year PhD student at Cardiff University, and she is working on immunovirotherapies, which are selective to tumours. So Ali, do you want to go ahead and give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and what you do?
Yeah, well, as you said, I work with viruses. So what we do in the lab basically is try to modify those viruses so they would target only cancer cells. And then in my case, those viruses also are able to express like a antibody. So it would be like a double effect. So you have the virus and also an immunotherapy, 2 for 1. So basically right now, I only have like another 4 months to finish my PhD. So get into that stressful stage of my PhD where I just try to do as much as possible. So trying to finish some experiments, just the experiments that I need to do to just get it done and just prove what we want to, like basically that the antibody works. So right now, because I'm working with PBMCs and working with immune cells, and the protocol needs like 3 days. So I'm just trying to use most of the time writing as much as possible, just kind of to get the introduction maybe done, but also just trying to get the last experiments done before I actually finish in the lab and just be able to properly write. So I wouldn't spend that much time in the lab, like doing actual experiments. I'm more actually writing. So yeah, my days basically now is kind of like half and half, I would say. Sometimes it's like 24 hours in the lab. Other days I have more time, so I just try to write, but it kind of depends a bit.
Yeah, and how is the writing going? Do you think there's like it's a shift from being in the lab a lot of the time for the first like 3 years of your PhD to then moving to some writing and like working out how you write a thesis and things like that. So do you think it's going okay? Are you enjoying any of the writing so far?
To be honest, no, but because I really don't like writing. So when I started, one thing that I used to enjoy when I was in my first year is just being able to be in the lab. But Anna mentioned the creativity, kind of like be able to think about how many experiments I was going to do, and all the things that I was going to do. Whereas now I just have to focus. So it's a bit tricky, that I think. So how is my writing going? I'm going to say it's going. But I think that is what most people, or the people that I've been talking to, has told me. Like you just need to find your own way to writing, basically.
Yeah, and I think it does come together the more you do it. Like I think once you get into the writing stage, it does help, and it's actually quite rewarding when you get to see all of your results coming together. So it will get better when you're a little bit further down the line. Do you have a plan next? Are you planning on staying in academia, or are you gonna move to a different field or something like that?
So I do want to stay in academia. I do like the type of research that we do. I'm one of those lucky people that I more or less know how industry works. And also, I think we all done that when we reach our last year, kind of like to ask other PhD students what they are doing, what are the plans. And more or less, I think I'm going to stay in academia. If I could, I would like to stay in my group. I really love my group. I wouldn't change it. So they're quite supportive. I think that's something really important, even more in the situation that I'm right now in my last year. But I guess that it is good to just find out and ask people. I've done it. That's why I'm so sure that I want academia, and I would love to stay in the group.
Good. Do you have any advice for someone like Anna, who's right at the beginning of her PhD, or anything that you would want to tell the more junior PhD students about now that you're at the end of your project and seeing what's happened?
I mean, I would say to have fun. Like, I know we go through really stressful periods, but just to have fun in the lab. Also try to balance life, kind of like just remember to have a social life, because I think it's good. And to be honest, I think it's my best years it's been in Cardiff. I learn a lot of things, so try to participate in as many projects as you can, not only for the CV, but also kind of you're gonna learn a lot of techniques, and it's always good, but you never know when you're gonna need them, or when it might be a good idea. I don't know, even a placement that kind of helps. Yeah, try to just be creative, to be honest. So just try to suggest new experiments, go a bit crazy. You got time, and well, money is difficult, but you might find a way always.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Thank you very much, Ali.
Thank you.
So next we're going to move on to Kwan, who is 3 years into his postdoc here at UCL. And he is working on a gene therapy for Dravet syndrome, which is a form of genetic epilepsy. So Kwan, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you get up to on a daily basis?
Now, yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. So basically, yes, I work developing a gene therapy for Dravet syndrome, a genetic epilepsy. And pretty much like Anna, my project involves a lot of testing these new viruses that we create in mice that have epilepsy. So my day usually starts going to the animal house, first checking if we have new pups, because we usually need to know if those pups will be sick soon or not. And then basically we use those tests to determine if we're going to treat certain pups or not. From there, sometimes I need to do behavioral on the mice. Basically, my mornings usually revolve around going to the animal house and doing different things, either determine if we have new pups, doing behavioral, things like that, or collecting tissues if necessary. Then the rest of my day would involve lab work. So that could be, for example, processing tissues that we have obtained from the mice, or doing, for example, cloning if we're designing a new virus, producing those viruses. Then part of my work also involves working with students. So sometimes MSc or helping the PhD students. So helping them with the projects, or for the MSc students, teaching them techniques that we use in the lab and that will be used for their projects. And then as well, there is usually something involving writing. So that could be either papers or grants. So far, I've mainly been involved helping write grants, but I've just been helping a little bits of the grants. And lately, I managed to just write a small grant on my own, which was an experience, I would say. It was interesting, but I would say that writing, as someone mentioned before, is a bit of a hurdle for me. I would say that once I start, I can do it. My issue is getting into the mindset of writing whatever I need to do at that point. But yeah, usually my day is divided into those different things.
Okay, great. So you've mentioned that you're juggling quite a lot of things now in the lab. So as you move to a postdoc, you start not just working on your own lab work, your own project, but you start getting some other administrative duties, and you start doing things like papers and grants. So how are you finding the juggling act of, balancing everything?
Yeah, actually, I think the second year was more like the learning. I would say that the first year as a postdoc was mainly like transferring, like the last year of my PhD, first year of postdoc were roughly the same. I was mainly doing similar things and mainly spending my time in the lab and working with the mice. And then on the second year, new things starting to add up. So the students, grants, lots of emails sometimes. And basically, I think the second year, I just kind of needed to learn how to organize all those different things. Now I think I kind of have like a schedule. I kind of can schedule myself into what I need to do every day and what I need to spend more time doing and what I can defer for another time. But I think on my second year, I had problems figuring it out what to prioritize. Usually because coming from the first year, I usually try to prioritize the lab work, even if whatever I was doing in the lab wasn't so pressure as other things. But I think now I'm managing better, but I think I will say that my second year was like the learning one, trying to incorporate these little things that I wasn't actually expecting initially to be there.
And how have you found starting the supervision of the master's students and like learning to do some of the teaching aspects as well? So if you're currently running one of the practical courses and things like that, so you're starting to get started on the teaching, and have you enjoyed that? Has it been something useful, like as well as your research?
So far, I've enjoyed teaching, but I've also heard like some crazy stories from other people. So I think it also depends on the student. Like it can be enjoyed by both sides. So I would say that I've been lucky that the students that I've worked with, they've been really good. So I never had like issues with them. It was usually easy to work with them. They were quite quick to learn. So I guess I still have to learn how to deal with a student that is not doing so well in the lab work, for example, or that doesn't meet deadlines when they need to submit different parts of the dissertation, for example. But yeah, so far I've enjoyed that, but I think I've had an easier experience so far on that respect.
And you occasionally lecture on some of the courses as well. So is learning how to lecture like a new skill that you have to develop?
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember the first time that I had to do that, I was just constantly worried that the students would get bored. So I remember I quite struggled planning like the first lecture that I had to do, just because I wasn't entirely sure, like how long do I need to spend on this topic without them basically falling asleep. So I think my problem with lecturing is, or was mainly on that point, is figuring out like a balance between how long do I spend on details, like how can I make the session a little bit more interactive. And I think the first time that I did it, I didn't have many tools to do them, or at least I didn't have a lot of experience. So after that, I took some courses that the university has, and then they teach you basically different tools or strategies that you can use to make the lessons more interactive, to have the students more engaged in the lesson. But I remember the first time that I did it, I was quite nervous and worried that they will just fall asleep while I was talking.
Yeah, that's good. It's interesting to hear what the teaching aspect is like and sort of how you get into that as a postdoc when new opportunities come your way. So you've also you mentioned earlier that you did your first grant, so that was great. How was it learning the grant writing process? And was it useful? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a new. I've done little bits of grant writing before, helping other people in the lab, but this was the first time that I actually had to fill out basically the whole form. I think writing it on my own wasn't so bad. I wouldn't describe it as a bad experience. I think it was mainly like the admin bit of grant writing. So, for example, planning when to send the draft, then sending reminder emails to get the comments back. Or, for example, that you need to send a draft to finance that I usually forgot. Then you need the signature of someone like the head of the institute that actually wasn't on my calendar. So at some point, I had forgotten about that, and I was kind of almost the last day, and I was like, "I'm so sorry, this is very late, but could you just check this document and sign it for me?" and basically learning those steps that I hadn't done before. So all those little bits, I think that was the main, like what I would say I struggled on this bit was administering, sending the draft to the different people and the different parts of the university that needed to know what I was doing.
Well, that's understandable. It's a very different technique that you suddenly have to start learning when you get further into your postdoc. So it's great that you've now started on the grant writing ladder, and hopefully will progress further from here. Okay, so we're now going to move on to Sonam, who is 3.5 years into her postdoc, and she is developing mRNA therapies for urea cycle disorders. So a little bit different. We're moving away from the viruses here. So Sonam, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your day?
Yes. Hi. Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, I am almost coming into my 4 years into the postdoc, and I'm working currently with the mRNA therapy, but before I was working with sort of exosomes therapy. So it's been sort of non-viral based therapies. Somehow I've managed to kind of end up working in my postdoc. My day-to-day actually is very similar to Juan and Anna. I'm basically going to the animal unit, but now I go in the afternoon because I usually wait to check the pups, and again starting to actually do some behavioral work as well. So I tend to do mine in the afternoon now. Depends mostly on the room bookings. But pretty much my time at the moment has been consumed by the animals, which is again checking for pups, because I have 2 or 3 experiments going on at the moment, and some at various stages, just checking that they're not sick. If they're sick, or if it's at the end point, do the required harvests, again, take their weights every day, do injections. With the mRNA therapy, I have to inject them every week. So my mice that are being treated, I have to go every week to do them IV injections. Otherwise, I do some in vitro work, but that takes about maybe an hour or 2 of my day. Thankfully, at the moment, I'm not doing too much bench lab work, just because I'm just fully focused on doing the in vivo experiments. And once that's completed, I'll be doing a bit more bench work again. Otherwise, I was involved a lot in writing, but mostly papers. So now I'm going through I've got my reviews back for the paper, so I'm working on that. So some experimental work and lots of working on the actual writing part from the comments. And also teaching. I've been involved in teaching quite a lot. So mostly with the master's modules, I've been involved for the past 3 years. And I was started as a teaching assistant, and now I've asked them if I can be a co-lead, because I've been involved in it for 3 years, which started from organizing the Moodle page to organizing with lecturers, running workshops, giving part of lectures, and heavily involved in the assessment. So now that they've recognized the amount of work I put in the module, they said I can be a co-lead now. So I'll continue to be part of these 2 modules. So teaching does take a lot of my time, especially like once the teaching's done, the assessment comes in, and then assessing them, giving them feedback. So I would say that does take a lot more of my time now than it did before. But again, as Juan said, it's just sort of trying juggling it, which at this stage of postdoc, I think I'm much better at doing it now than I was before. So yeah, that's pretty much my day.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. So you're the first person to mention paper writing and things like this. So how do you find the whole process of, first gathering the data, then making it into a manuscript and doing all of the submission process?
So I guess it depends on experience. When I first started here, I really struggled to get sort of data to publish. So like first couple of years, it was just kind of things not working. So when things did eventually start working, I think almost 2 years into my postdoc, I actually was looking forward to putting the data together and writing, which I never thought I would say that. I never thought I would say that during my PhD or even my first couple of years of my postdoc, but it was just such a nice feeling to be able to put everything together. Sort of started with writing abstracts for conferences and then kind of moving on to writing your paper just seemed like a very natural process. And at some point, I kind of realized that this could lead on to paper writing. So I tried to be organized to get all my data together as much as possible from the start as it came, and having that kind of structure in your head, and obviously talking to my PI as well, having that conversation before I start writing, I think just made the process a bit easier. Having said that, if this was end of my PhD or beginning of my postdoc, I maybe wouldn't have found it as smoother process as I did find it writing it last year. So I think a lot of it came down to experience as well, but I kind of thoroughly enjoyed it. Not so much now during the review process, but actually writing the initial manuscript was surprisingly a bit fun. I enjoyed it, but I think that was very much down to the experience in the past few years.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you've also mentioned writing conference abstracts then. So when you get further down into your career, do you get the opportunity to go to more conferences and present at them and things like that, and sort of move into like the networking side of conferences and things that you have to do to start establishing yourself like within your research field?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess again that depends on group, but my boss is very encouraging, especially now we were at the stage that we were going to at some point write a manuscript. It would be good to kind of get your work out there, and I mean, I had to because I started my postdoc during essentially COVID periods. The 2 years, I didn't really get to do much networking or take part physically in conferences. So being able to do that last year was I really, really appreciated that. And I was really lucky and fortunate that they did choose my abstracts for sort of oral presentations as well, which I'd never done. I never got the opportunity during my PhD and during the initial years of my postdoc. So it was a very, very great experience to have. But again, I think not being able to do that for like past few years just meant that when it did come, it was more of excitement and less of nervousness. So again, that just came down to not being able to see people and present to people in person. I was very excited to be able to do that last year, even during posters as well. So
yeah, that's great. And do you find you have to be quite organized if you have many experiments running in the lab at the same time? Also, like with your juggling with the admin duties and things like this. But if you've got many experiments, like you said, you got some in vitro ones, some various mice at different stages. Like, how do you find having to sort of organize yourself so you can keep on top of all of your experiments?
You definitely have to be very, very organized, but I am known in my group to be the most organized person. I have like my timetable. I mean, I'm not crazy organizer, but I am definitely probably the most organized in the group. It's one of those things, it's like, if I can't do it, probably no one can do it in the group. But I found it again as easier, especially now I'm much more used to the animal model. I'm kind of continuing the work I was doing last year. I'm moving on to the next stage. So in a way, it's easier for me to, I guess, organize my work a bit better. And again, having been involved in teaching throughout the past 3 years, the organizing process has just gotten a bit better. Sometimes it does get a bit too much, but I think I've kind of just learned to step back if it's too much. And if the deadline doesn't get met, then that's it. It shouldn't be, I always make sure that it doesn't take over my personal life as well. So yeah, I do try to meet most of the deadlines and be organized, but I'm also okay if they don't, as long as the priority ones are met. I think that's probably the most important thing. Otherwise it gets too stressful. So I definitely say be organized, but also prioritize.
Yeah, very good advice. I think that would also go for the PhD students. You know, you have to learn how to manage these things. And I think that was very good, sensible advice. Yeah. Okay, so lastly, we're going to move on to Julia. So Julia is a new lecturer at the School of Pharmacy. and this is basically focusing on viral vector technologies. So Julia, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, yes, thanks. So yeah, I've been through everything that's been said right now, and I have to say that everyone is doing exactly what they're supposed to do. So I think there are three main points from my perspective, which is a step further. So what to do before, how to get there, and then what actually you're supposed to do once you get your lectureship. So in terms of when you're postdoc and you're thinking, as many of you have mentioned already, and you're thinking of staying in academia, becoming a PI or a lecturer, you obviously need to demonstrate your independence, and that means starting applying for grants, as Juan was saying. Even if they're small, start with a couple of thousand, doesn't matter, but you have to show that you are able to get your own ideas, to write a grant and start getting some fundings. Obviously, if you have a fellowship, you are in a stronger position, or a big grant that potentially could cover your salary, because the new department or the new university, wherever you're applying, will be happy to have you. Demonstrates that, again, you can get funding, and you might already have some students, some projects going on. So obviously it's a good place where to be. My experience and my suggestion is, especially if you want to stay within the same university, you have to change what you're doing. So we all did our PhD and postdoc working more or less in the same things, in the same groups. When you apply for lectureship, you need to show that you are independent. You're not just doing what your previous PI is doing. This obviously doesn't mean that one day you work in gene therapy for rare diseases and the day after you work on plants, but you need to change direction. You need to show that you need to find your own individuality almost. So in my personal experience, obviously I'm still in the gene therapy context, but I went all the way down to the manufacturing side, the bioengineering side. I'm still collaborating and still involved in some of the therapeutic projects, but I've changed direction, because I have to show that these are my ideas, this is my niche. I'm not just doing something that I've just been doing for a few years now. So this is something that usually the panels consider. So how you as a candidate, what new techniques, what new ideas are you bringing? As an institute, as a department, I don't need someone else that does exactly the same thing that your previous PI does. So that it's quite important. And then once you get there, everything gets amplified 1,000 times. So you still have possibility to do your experiments. You have your PhD students. You have to teach them. And it's not just teaching in the lab, it's the next step of responsibility. Then you have to get onto your paper writing, onto your grant writing, because you have to, again, demonstrate that you're independent, that you're bringing money. At the end of the day, at the university, the main point of the university is for you to bring money in. So you have to start getting collaborations, thinking a bit outside the box. And I'm not saying you're on your own, because hopefully you will still have a supporting network behind you, but it's your responsibility, so you really need to go for it. And at least in my position here at the School of Pharmacy, we have big cohorts of undergrads students. It's big. There's a lot of teaching involved, basically. Not all departments, not all university have this. Here in particular, it's quite heavy on teaching, so the position comes with a lot of teaching. We all did, as we heard, we all did some master teaching at master level, which is great, and you start getting experience. But believe me, when you teach undergrads, first year, second year, it's completely different. It's all new word. You think you can do it. It's not. It's completely different. You need a completely different mindset, completely different way of delivery, completely different way of, building your reading material, your study material. It takes 10 times longer than a master course. We all did this lecture in master courses. You show up with 3 slides put together the night before. You talk about your own research. You're the best person to know your own research. You don't have to prepare that much. For undergrads, you might be teaching something that I'm not saying you don't know anything about, but you've studied 10 years before during your undergrad. So you will have to go and update yourself again, study yourself. You really need to change the way you deliver in lectures. It comes with a whole series of emails and tutoring and question. You have to write your own question for the exams. You have to then, as Suna was saying, there is a lot of marking required. So it's what you've been doing so far 10 times more, and that at least in my experience, takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to produce new material for teaching and follow up throughout the academic year. So UCL, as it's a mandatory requirement for lectures in probation. So UCL, you have 3 years of probation, and after that you might be or not be confirmed as a lecturer. During these 3 years, you are required to take training courses on teaching, evaluation, tutoring, and all these things. And you are required to get the higher education fellowship. Again, different university might have different requirements. This is a mandatory things for UCL. So you'll have to join all these courses, and you'll have to get the fellowship, which I don't know if anyone is familiar with this. Basically, you have to present some case studies of your teaching, of your tutoring, and show what you've done, how you apply some principles that they're fundamental for higher education, and it's quite a long application. It's long because it requires you to sit down and actually analyze what you're doing. I find scientific writing easier to do rather than this, but it's one of the point of the long list of things to do. So yeah.
Okay, great. That was a really extensive overview of what you're doing so far. So that's really good to hear it from somebody who's gone through the PhD and postdoc journey and is now out the other side. So it's
just about.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for those a bit earlier on in the journey about either establishing collaborations or networking, or sort of doing these things that might help you to build your independence when the time comes later?
Absolutely. As I said, even if you start with those, small internal departmental grants of £1,000, £2,000, just to buy some plasmids, whatever you do, start with that, because everything adds up. Where collaboration is essential, because without collaboration, science couldn't exist, at least in my opinion. So try to think a bit outside the box. Don't stay just within your clique. I know it's easy, and again, I put myself first in line, because many of my collaborators are people I've been working for the last 10 years, but you need to be a bit more courageous and put yourself out there. Try to find different expertise, different people from different universities, from different countries, because you never know what good things can come out of it. And when you write your grants, this is something that is heavily people look at these things. If you have collaboration, and this collaboration ideally would need to be with someone else that is not your ex-supervisor or something like that. So try to put yourself out there as much as you can, your name out, try to get in as many papers as possible, learn new technique, new expertise. You never know what can be helpful one day.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And how was it working, or sort of the transition from working on a project that somebody else might have designed and thought of to working on your own ideas? Like, do you feel differently about the project when it's your own idea?
I have to say, it's quite probably unique position, because I've been here at the School of Pharmacy since my PhD, and I've started with my own project during the PhD. I developed my own things and took it forward during my postdoc. Then I got a fellowship when I was doing my own things already. So I was already managing a lab. I was already managing PhD students. So it would have been different if you go to a completely different university, different city, different place. So probably I'm not the best example to explain that. It's all about, it's more responsibility in general. And this is the time where you actually have to, come up with your own ideas. It's just continuing what you're doing is not good enough, in the sense, it's not that your science is not good enough, but at some point that project will end. So you need to be ready to jump on the next one, on the next one, on the next one. So you can just, close yourself into your own little words. So, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you to everyone on the panel for giving us some information about what you do. And we're going to open up the floor to questions from the audience now. So we have a couple submitted already, but if you want to continue to submit them some more, that would be great. So I'll start off with a question that we had asked in advance of this today. So somebody asked if a UK degree was acceptable to pursue PhD level education abroad, specifically in Germany, was this question. So we can't necessarily speak from experience, but it seems that most degrees that are accredited by a UK institution would probably be transferable to abroad, to international institutions. But we would always advise, double checking with the institution that you are actually interested in applying to, just in case they have a specific rule or something that would be specific to them. But it seems that yes, UK degrees would be transferable, which is great. Okay, so we have first couple of questions in the chat. So Rebecca has asked, for postdocs, what would you say are the main differences of working in the lab as a PhD versus as a postdoc? Is it less stressful when you don't have the pressure of being a student still? So maybe Sonam or Kwon can answer this question.
Juan, do you want to go first?
All right, I'll go first. I don't know. I would say that the first year I didn't feel that different. I think it took me a little bit to change my PhD mindset to a postdoc. I will just say that with the postdoc, I just prioritize more whatever I'm doing in the lab. But I think that's mainly a result of the other things that I need to do. I would say that when I was a student, I don't know if it was the pressure, but it was just that you kind of have a more rigid structure as a student, or you have, let's say, weekly or monthly meetings, and you want to present data to your PI on those meetings. So as a student, you kind of try to do as much work as you do in the lab. As a postdoc, I think it's slightly different, just because in the project, as you are kind of managing the project and you have overall objectives, but you don't have these weekly or monthly data requirements. As long as you basically reach those milestones in your project within, let's say, 3 months, you can kind of administer your time more easily. Basically, you have more time to organize your experiments. I would say that that's the main difference between the postdoc and how I felt as a student, is that I have more time. Even if I have to do the same amount of work, I just feel like I can organize my experiments in a different way that makes my life in the lab easier.
Thank you. I guess I had slightly different experience because I did my PhD in Bristol and I moved here for postdoc, but I also completely moved field. So I used to work in a completely different area before, and now I work in therapy for neuropsychical disorders. I didn't even know, I mean, I knew about liver, but I didn't even really know much about it. I was working in brain before. So I guess it was slightly different experience in that, yes, at PhD, I had to get my PhD, I guess, and then lots of these meetings and deadlines. But I guess moving here in a different field and different university, I just felt a different kind of pressure to kind of show that I am capable of adapting and learning, and I can be a good postdoc. Obviously, my boss didn't know much about me other than this CV that he got of me. So it was kind of understanding each other's expectations as well at the same time. So I guess in that sense, first year was a little bit of pressure, but not necessarily from him, but from myself, that I wanted to prove myself that I can move field, I can learn different things, I can do in vivo work. But at the same time, I think having the experience of PhD just meant that I was less scared of trying new things and even just doing simple lab experiments, because you can just apply the skills that you've learned. I kind of was more confident to just go for it and not be scared, I guess. I had help at least to adjust to the animal work, in vivo work. So that helped as well. So I guess that's probably the difference, that I've kind of felt a different kind of pressure, but at the same time, I wanted to do it and I wanted to learn. And having 4 years of PhD experience just helped a lot more. And I enjoyed being here for 3.5 years now. So yeah, I quite enjoyed it. So it's definitely okay to move as well, is what I would say. Like, I was working on a completely different thing in a different university, and I literally just said, this is it, I want to move into translational research. So I just moved to London and just went to kind of, me and my boss just went in blind in this. He didn't know much about me, I didn't know much about him, but we both kind of helped each other out in that sense. So yeah, experience.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. You actually also answered one of the next questions we had about moving institutions. So that worked out very well. So we have a question for Julia. So as a young PI, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job?
Thank you for the young PI. I'm not young, but anyway, I would say as a scientist in general, from a strictly work point of view, when you get your grants in and you get awarded, obviously, so a paper out, obviously. On a personal side, I would say, you start getting involved with a lot of PhD students, you get in your own PhD students. So, when they actually get their experiments to work, and, when they're happy, I'm happy, because we all been through that, and how it can be stressful, it can be tricky, it can take a toll on your mental well-being. So having them happy and excited about science, that is, on a personal note, that's the best.
Great. Okay, so now for everybody on the panel, what are a couple of things you try to do to achieve a good work-life balance?
I'm not good in this. I have to say, yeah, I can't answer this because I'm terrible in balancing, which is not good. But yeah, maybe the other panelists, they are suggesting for me as well.
I can try. I think I would say, compared to PhD, again, I feel, I guess, more confident in the lab. So That again makes it easier for the work-life balance, but I always make sure to not work weekends. I mean, sometimes I do if I absolutely have to, or if there's a deadline, or if it's animals. That's sort of the exception I make. But if I have plans, that's it. I always just try not to turn on my laptop or get the BSG staff to help me out if there's any issues with the animal unit. In the evenings as well, I try to finish on time, but if I don't want to work weekends, sometimes I do work a bit later in the evening, but that's the sort of exception I will make. But again, if I have plans, I try not to. So it's just, I think, mentally telling yourself just not to do it, because I mean, I definitely find that if I work too much, I just kind of lose that motivation, not necessarily motivation, but you're just mentally and physically drained, and I actually can't do anything even if I want to. So I've just kind of learned that it's not good for me anyways. If I want to be effective, I will just stop and I'll start again the next day, even if it's waking up early. But then again, some people can work longer, which is great, but I can't. So you just kind of, I just learn what's I'm capable of and how far I can push myself. Yes. But you have to you have to say you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. So
if I can add on that, you're absolutely right in the sense that everyone is different. Some people have higher thresholds. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a good thing, but everyone is different. So some people can take more stress, more workload, longer hours. Some people, they cannot. Again, there is no right and wrong answer here, but you have to work with, you have to understand and know yourself, I guess. And exactly what you were saying, you know yourself, you know that you can take up to here, and then let's say you're not functioning, it's not productive for you, so it's better take a step back and start fresh. This level though changes in different people, different time of your life. You know, one day might be more difficult than the other because there is life in the meantime. So you have to adapt a bit. But I would say you have to basically know yourself and put yourself some limits. Your limits might be different from mine. So yeah.
I would say try to do the same things that Sonam was mentioning too. So try to have, like, for example, try not to work on the weekends, or for example, I try to use technology. So now the phones have these filters that you can trigger when you are outside of work, for example. So, for example, for me, emails on the weekend, I only have it set so I get notifications from the people that email me from BSU, because the only reason why I would work on an emergency not planned on the weekend would be because my mice are sick. So basically, I have an exception for the weekends that I will receive any emails coming from the animal unit. And that means that I will basically know if my mice are sick, and then I can actually do something about it. But for the rest of the work email, for example, I try to have, like, I will not check the emails until Monday morning, for example. And that has helped because when I was a PhD student, I will just check my emails the 7 days of the week. I will just be on top of everything all the time. And then, for example, for the work week, I usually try to plan my experiments like within, let's plan it to leave at 5, or that I will need to leave at 5 p.m. I usually try to plan the experiments to finish at least at 4, and then I have an hour of things didn't go as planned. So at least I have an hour of leeway in terms of fixing things, and not basically plan my experiments for the time that I want to leave. So if things go wrong, then I will end up leaving at 6 or 7 p.m. So I usually basically try to juggle that into having some buffer times. And if you finish on time, you always have some extra stuff to do. You need to write things, or you need to mark essays, as Sonam and Julia do. So if you have some extra time, you can do your other to-do things. But if things didn't go well in the lab, you also have some leeway to actually not leave work so late.
Yeah, it's something I'm still kind of getting used to. I know I tend to take a lot of things in the lab quite personally if experiments don't go right, and sometimes I find it hard to let it go once I walk out the front door at work and go home. But I'm getting a bit more used to it now. I just find if I just go and do something I enjoy, go to the gym, go for a run or a nice long walk, and just say, okay, that's done for one day. But yeah, it's hard sometimes.
Okay, that's great. So perhaps either Anna or Ali can answer this next question. So do you have any advice for master's students in order to try to find a PhD, or sort of different routes into a PhD, or how you went about looking, anything along those lines?
So basically the way I did it, I think one, just try to find if you have like any, like the government, usually like where I come from, the government has different scholarships. So just try, if you know of the name of those scholarships, just go and check them. If not, one thing that I didn't use, but I think is quite handy, is actually Twitter. I feel like a lot of PIs, they actually post a lot of things, a lot of positions on Twitter. And that is something that I didn't know when I actually applied for mine. So it's quite handy. Also, if you really know what you want, just Google the research center, and they usually have an option for like careers or jobs. And I think like a different option, a different approach is if you're really keen on working with certain people or like in a certain group, just email them straight away. They might not reply, but they know you already got it. So just try to email them saying that you want to work with them, you're interested in that. And even if they don't have money, sometimes they just say like, well, right now we don't have money, or I'm not looking for a PhD, but we are just putting this grant together. So maybe just email in around May or June, so we can check, we can see. So that is another way. It's a bit straightforward. I didn't do it, but if not, there's like a website. It's called Scholarships, and usually you can find a lot of them, and you can actually filter. So it kind of makes things a bit easier. That is, in my case, was because I was working in a different lab. So I find out about my PI because of my old supervisor. But I know that, for example, in his case, he actually upload the offered scholarships, and then also he used Twitter to actually post the position. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, it's a really good advice about giving the Twitter bit there, because I think personally I've also found it's really useful to sort of build your network, and sort of, even if you just follow some interesting people on Twitter, then you might get new ideas, or you might get ideas for collaborations in the future. But it's also really useful for job positions. So that's definitely a good point for bringing it up. Anna, did you have anything to add about starting the PhD process, or finding a project or anything like that?
Yeah, I think Ali gave a great answer there. I think just network as much as possible. Email, and have hope. You'll get there.
Yeah, I would say that's a great have hope there. That's very good, because I think sometimes when you apply for an awful lot of PhDs, it can get a bit, disheartening if you don't get so many responses or things like that. So it's good to say, have hope, just keep going and moving on. Okay, and we have another question about as a PhD student, how would you go about finding a postdoc? I would guess it's quite similar to the what you guys have said about finding a PhD, but does anybody else have any thoughts on the matter?
Well, I think, between me, Juan, we were all on the same path, so we kept staying on, in the same lab, in the same group. So probably, again, not the best example, but yeah, very similar to that. Having said that, it's probably your best chance if you want to change slightly fields or change university. That is for me is the sweet spot where you can do that, because after your postdoc or your fellowships, you already quite established in your position in your field, so it's more difficult to change. Doing something, Sonam, if I'm correct, you move from your PhD, right, to your postdoc, and that is still acceptable and easy to do. So if you're thinking about changing place, university or field, I would say that is the sweet spot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, after I finished my PhD, I did sort of stay about 9 months, kind of doing postdoc, but learning new technique kind of thing. But I was essentially doing the same thing. But when I applied for postdoc, I literally just went to every possible website. I even went to specific university. I guess sometimes geographical locations can help as well. I kind of knew London was one of the places I wanted to go just for personal reasons. So I did specifically go to university websites and searched for any postdoc. Obviously, it wasn't a complete move. I wasn't doing physics and I moved to biology or something. So you can still filter out. But I think in the end, I essentially had like 4 or 5 interviews, pretty much all in UCL, just somehow ended up that way. But I had applied to all other universities in London, in Birmingham, like everywhere. Because I didn't want it to have some transferable skills and vaguely related skills to be able to be considered for interview. But I did end up interviewing about 4 or 5 positions. And I was lucky enough to have a couple of choices to then decide to come for this one. So again, it's the same as PhD. I just looked everywhere and just kept applying. That personal statement, tweaking it a little bit every single time you apply.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as Julia mentioned, I basically continued on the same lab from when I was doing my PhD. It was a weird time when I was in that transition because COVID was happening. So I wasn't really, I did look for PhDs, for example. I'm from Chile, so I did look for PhD postdoc there as well. But I was mainly thinking about staying here. And the other thing is that even COVID was around, I had decided to stay on the same group before that actually happened. And my decision was mainly driven because I liked my job, like what I was actually doing. And so Julia mentioned changing fields. So for me, the changing fields happened from my undergrad, then master's and PhD. So I used to work as a physiotherapist before, and I specialized in neurological patients. And after doing that, I changed the fields. And basically, when I was thinking about, do I need to change again, doing my postdoc in this, do I want a different thing? And I was happy with what I was doing, basically. So in my case, I was lucky that I could continue doing the work that I actually like from my PhD towards my postdoc. But then now, Julia also mentioned, you need to still start thinking about maybe not changing completely to a different field, but now you have to, or I have to start thinking about those new ideas that are different from what I've been doing so far at this point. So I guess eventually you always have to move to a different field or a different subject as comfortable as you would be with what you're doing.
Okay, great. So I'll give the audience a couple more minutes to ask any more questions in the chat. But does anybody in the panel have any questions for each other, or comments on anything that anybody else has said, whilst we are just waiting for the audience to submit any last questions?
Can I ask something then? For the postdoc, sorry. So now that I have to think about what I was gonna do and all that, I really want to stay in the same group, but I didn't actually think about my CV, kind of like it would be better to actually change because you go to a different lab. you're going to learn all the techniques, or whether if it would be better to actually stay, which means that you're going to stick to the same project. So I know what I want to do because I'm happy. So I didn't actually think maybe like logically of like what is actually better for my career. So I don't know, any thoughts?
This one will be better.
Yeah, I guess basically I did what you're thinking of doing, like stay on the same lab. So I guess it depends as well, like the project, like is there the option to continue the project in the lab that you're on? And basically just mainly figuring it out how you will go on with that. So you need to find the money. So you probably already have a grant lined up, or you have applied for grants with your PI. So I guess mainly is finding a way of continuing your work. And then basically, I guess it would be a relatively easier for you, for example, to tailor your CV for the lab that you currently work on, because you know basically what they're looking for. So in terms of your CV, for example, I don't think you'll have much problems. And you can usually ask a postdoc in your lab, like, can I see your CV, and take it as an example to actually write mine. And even if it's not for the same lab, you can usually just ask any postdocs, and they will give you their CV, and then you can basically tailor yours similarly. But I would say to continue your work and staying in the same lab, I think the hardest part is figuring out how to continue, basically getting the money to continue the project.
Yeah, I would say there's kind of cons of moving as well, because I moved to different fields. It basically took me like 2-3 years to just establish myself to new people, not just within the institute, outside the institute, even at conferences, like you're not meeting the same people that you met during PhD. So I guess for me, it took me much longer to establish a certain level of niche as well in this field. And I'm just, to be 3.5 years, 4 years, I'm just kind of comfortable in this kind of area now, I would say. So I guess, it was good for me because I knew I wanted to move and I wanted different area of research. And I just had to do it. Otherwise, I didn't think I would stay in research longer. So, but obviously that had its backside that it took me much longer to establish my postdoc, I think I would say.
Yeah, I think I would say both of what you said is very good. I was sort of in the middle of both of you. So I kept in the same field, but changed university. So sort of in the middle of Quan and Sona. So, and I would say both of their points are very valid. I think, you work out what's best for you. And if staying in the same lab is going to make you happier and it's going to make your work better, then I don't think that's necessarily like a negative in terms of your career at all. I think if you get good work out of it, I don't think staying in the same lab is a problem at all. But equally, then you have to find, solutions of how to get around some of the things that, if you were just applying for a job that you saw on Twitter, like a postdoc, for example, there's obviously the funding already there. The project is about to start. It's maybe slightly easier to get into postdoc at a different lab rather than staying in the same one, unless it's been planned like a year in advance or something like that. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if you want to stay in your current lab. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of the seminar now. So if there are no more questions from the audience, we haven't got any in the past 5 minutes. So I think I'd just like to thank all of our panel members for joining today. It was really interesting to hear all of your different viewpoints of how the PhD and postdoc and the early lecturer sort of life cycle has benefited you all, and what you like and not so like so much. So it's been really interesting. So thank you very much to all our panel members. And thank you all to you for joining us today. This recording will be up on YouTube for people who want to watch later, or if you want to come back to anything that anybody has said. So thank you very much, and please join us for the next BSGCT seminar next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.